the odds are stacked against us. We all want a successful life, but odds are only 3 out of 10 husbands think it's important to have a healthy marriage.
Women dream of their wedding day, but odds are half of their fairy tale romances will end in divorce.
Most parents believe they should be a spiritual influence on their children, but odds are almost 1/3 of those parents claim to not even have a faith of their own.
We all want friends, but odds are 25% of us feel like we don't have anyone to confide in.
So we've been in this message series here at Aldersgate called How to Beat the Odds. And it just occurred to me this week that just in culture, in the world we live in, there was a lot of things to talk about in terms of beating the odds. So this morning, I'm assuming the odds are some of you seated here lost some money on a particular event that happened last night. Or the odds are some of you sitting here won some money on a particular event last night. And some of you, odds are like an ostrich with your head stuck in the sand and going, what did I miss yesterday? Did I fall asleep early? Or there was this huge fight yesterday, Mayweather-McGregor. Mayweather knocked out McGregor in the 10th round. The odds of that happening were 18-1. The odds, if you bought a certain ticket this week to win $700 million, the odds of you winning that lottery were 1 in 292 million. And if you did not win a ticket, or if you did not buy a ticket, the odds of you winning were 0%. How about the solar eclipse? Any of you see the eclipse on Monday? How many of your eyes are still hurting? I'm just joking. You know, the odds of seeing more than one solar eclipse in your lifetime are almost non-existent. But many of you, not those of you seated on the front row, because the first one occurred in 1979, the last contiguous one in the U.S., occurred in 1979. But for some of you who were around in 1979, you were around for the one on Monday, and hopefully you will be around for the one that will happen in 2024. You could see 3 total solar eclipses in your lifetime, which the odds are, it doesn't even calculate. How about this? Those residents of Corpus Christi, before this summer, they had a 35% chance of a hurricane hitting their town. Now, the odds that it would be a Category 4 hurricane were less than 10%. And the odds that another hurricane will hit in the same place, or actually even anywhere along the Texas coast again this year, is less than 13%. The odds that something will go wrong at any wedding is 100%. That's a rough transition, but stay with me for just a second, all right? The odds that anything will go wrong at a wedding are 100%. Some of you are sitting here and you're like, yeah, this happened at my wedding. I can tell you the story. Or I was at a wedding this time and this is what happened at that wedding. If you've been at a wedding that I've officiated, the odds are that I messed something up are extremely great. Amy and I, we got married July 31st, 1993. July 31st. First United Methodist Church, Earth, Texas, the temperature on that July 31st was well over 100 degrees. And the air conditioner in the sanctuary of the church decided not to work on July 31st, 1993. It was well over 100 degrees inside the sanctuary when we got married that evening, or at least it felt like it was. Something will always go wrong at any wedding. When I do weddings, I tell the bride, especially the bride, but also the groom, the evening before the wedding, look, something's going to happen tomorrow that doesn't go exactly the way you want it to. This is not going to work out exactly right. This person's, something's going to happen. Whatever happens, just go with it. It's your wedding. It's going to be awesome. This morning, I want to take you to the story of a wedding. This story is actually in the Bible. It's in John chapter 2. If you got a Bible with you, you can open it, or if you got your phone, I would encourage you to just grab it, go to John chapter 2. But there's a story of a wedding in John chapter 2. Jesus is at the wedding. Jesus' mom is at the wedding. And all of Jesus' disciples are at the wedding, the 12 disciples, those that he specifically picked and called to follow him, that he was going to mentor, that he was going to coach for his 3 years of ministry here on earth. And they're all at this wedding. And you need to understand, in first century Palestine, you need to know something about weddings. These weddings did not just happen on a weekend. Like it wasn't, hey, let's come together and have a little rehearsal on Friday night, and have a little rehearsal dinner, and then on Saturday we're going to get married, and then we're going to leave for the honeymoon, and everything's perfect. No. Weddings in first century Palestine lasted a week at a time. The bride and the groom got married somewhere in there in the middle, but they lasted for an entire week. And in first century Palestine, you had two options when it came to drinks. You had water or you had wine. And so you can imagine at a wedding celebration that lasted a week at a time, the latter was the most popular drink. And in fact, in first century Palestine, Eastern weddings are much different than Western weddings. In Eastern weddings, it's not the bride who's the star of the show, it's the groom. So it's not bridezilla, it's groomzilla. And the groom's family is responsible for everything. So they're responsible for this entire week-long shindig, including keeping the wine flowing all week long. And in this wedding, in John chapter 2, there was an incredible blunder. The family ran out of wine. Now you need to understand that it wasn't just, oh, they ran out of, this was publicly shameful, extremely humiliating, and so much a cultural thing that the family could be fined for running out of wine during the wedding celebration. So not only were they out the expense of the entire wedding, but now they would have to pay extra because they didn't plan for enough wine or because they invited too many winos. I'm not sure which is true, but either way, they were going to be out more money. The point I'm trying to make is this was a huge deal. We've been talking this entire message series about huge deals in our life. Life crises, obstacles, those situations we get into where we feel like the odds that we're going to get out of them are just insurmountable, where the circumstances are just unbearable, like the situation just has no answer. It's these life crisis kind of things. And we've said multiple times during this message series that life is all about these crises. You're either in the middle of one right now, you're just coming out of one, or you're getting ready to go into another life crisis. And I want you to understand that in this wedding in John chapter 2, where Jesus and his mom and all the disciples are out, this was a life crisis. This was a huge deal. And so Mary, Jesus' mother, turns to Jesus and says, you got to do something. You got to help. We don't know if they were related to the family. We don't know if they were just friends. We don't know if they were acquaintances. We don't know why they were at the wedding specifically, but we know Mary was smart enough to know this was about to be a huge public embarrassment for this family, and they needed help. And so she turned to Jesus and said, you got to help them. So Jesus turns water into wine. And he doesn't just turn it into any wine. He turns it into the best wine. So after he turns water into wine, some of the servants take the wine that was water, that's now wine, to the master of ceremonies. The master of ceremonies sips the wine and is like, oh my goodness, this is the best wine. And he says to the groom, you've done this all backwards, because normally what would happen at these week-long weddings is that they would serve the best wine the first couple of days, and after everybody had had plenty to drink, then they would bring out the wine that wasn't so good. It's like they would start the wedding celebration drinking wine out of a bottle, but by the end of the week, they were drinking out of a box. That's how it was, right? And the master of ceremonies is like, man, you've saved the best for last. The best is yet to come. The point of today's message is this. When you turn to God during life's crises, the best is always yet to come. When you turn to Jesus, the best is always yet to come. And I want to show it to you in this wedding story. So if you got your phone, or like I said, if you got the Bible in your lap or whatever, John chapter 2, I just want to look at a few selected verses, all right? We're not going to go through the whole story, but just a few things. The first one I want to look at is John chapter 2, verse 3. In the ES version, it specifically says, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him. When the wine ran out, Mary said to Jesus. When the wine was all gone. Now, what I want us to think about is this. We are exactly like Mary. We're exactly like this situation. That oftentimes we turn to Jesus when we run out, when we're empty. When we've exhausted all of our options, we've tried everything. We're in this life crisis, this life situation. The odds are insurmountable, stacked against us. We've tried everything we know to try. We've done everything we know to do. And when we have just come to the end of our rope and we don't know where else to go, what else to say, or where else to turn, we turn to Jesus. When we wake up in the morning and there is no money left in our bank account, we turn to God. When we are at the end of the rope in our marriage, when we're at the end of our rope in relationships, when we're at the end of our rope in church, whenever we get to those places in life where we don't know what else to do, we've exhausted all of our options, we've tried everything, we don't have any more faith, we don't have any more trust, we don't have any more hope. When we are empty, we turn to Jesus. Now the good news is this. When we turn to Jesus, He's willing to meet us every single time. The odds of that happening, 100%. When we are empty, when we've exhausted all of our options, when we've run out of everything we know to try, when we've done everything we can do, and we turn to Jesus, 100% of the time, He is there to meet us. You can count on it. The odds are 100%. Jesus is ready and willing to meet us in that place. In fact, that's exactly what He does here with Mary. Jesus said to her, I'm in verse 4, "Woman, what does this have to do with me?" Now, I need you to understand something here, all right? When Jesus says to His mom, "Woman," it's not like a teenager says to their mom, "Woman." You need to hear this very clearly, all right? This was a very respectable, affectionate term that a son would use for his mom in this culture, okay? Today, the culture is different. You go home today and try "woman" on your mom, I'm not responsible if you get slapped across the face, all right? But Jesus, yeah, parents are applauding. But Jesus was very respectable, very affectionate when He addressed His mom this way. And here's what He says, "What does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." Some translations will read, "My time has not yet come." Now, we don't know why Jesus went ahead and did the miracle. We don't know why He went ahead and turned the water into wine. Maybe it was just to respect His mother. Maybe it was because He had an association with the family and He wanted them to avoid the shame and humiliation. Maybe it was because, we're going to read in verse 11 here in just a minute, there was something else behind it. But for whatever reason, Jesus turned the water into wine. Jesus' timing, God's timing, is always perfect. Always perfect. Last week, we had Compassion International with us. Samuel Orlando was with us. He grew up in the Dominican Republic. Poverty. He shared true poverty, like not knowing if he was going to have breakfast or lunch or dinner during the day. And he spoke about how he was sponsored by an individual from Canada with Compassion International, and how that changed his life forever because he no longer had to wonder whether he was going to have food. He didn't have to wear shoes that had holes in them anymore. He could go to school every day. He had a uniform to wear to school. And most importantly, when he was there, he would hear about Jesus every single day. The thing that struck me the most when he was sharing about his story is that he was an older child before he received a sponsor with Compassion International. And he talked about how not only is God's timing never late, because that's how we often associate with God's timing is that it's never late. But the thing that he said that really struck me is that God's timing is never early. It's always perfect. It's always just right. And listen, I know when we get into these times of life where the situations are overwhelming and we want out of it so bad, we want a solution, we want the answer, that it's just so simple to say, God, now's the right time. Now. God's timing is always perfect. My time has not yet come. This is a theme that John develops throughout his entire book, his entire letter. So there's 4 what we call gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all tell the story of Jesus. They just tell it from a different perspective. And John writes his perspective much later than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so John's much different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke when you read it. It's still about Jesus and his story, but it's much different than how Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell it. And so John tells it very different. He develops this theme about God's timing throughout his entire book, through his entire story. I just want to walk you through this really fast. So here in John chapter 2, Jesus says, my time has not yet come. It's not my hour. If you go over to John chapter 7, it's in a different context, but you find the same words in John chapter 7, verse 6. My time has not yet come. 2 verses later, in John chapter 7, verse 8, he explains it this way. My time has not yet fully come. Same concept, same thing, different context. John chapter 7, verse 30, so now we're at the end of that chapter. They were seeking to arrest Jesus. Now, we all know that on the night Jesus was betrayed, he was arrested. And he was put on trial, and he was hung on a cross, and he was crucified. But it didn't happen in John chapter 7. It wasn't time yet. John chapter 7, verse 30 says, they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. But then when we get over to John chapter 12, verse 20, it says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. It wasn't the right time for Jesus to be arrested and crucified in John chapter 7 or John chapter 8, but apparently by the time we get to John chapter 12, it was the right time because God's time is always perfect. You see it in John chapter 13. Now before the feast of the Passover, we know that's when Jesus was crucified. When Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. You see, Jesus could have been crucified in John chapter 7, but it wasn't his time. Instead, he was crucified after John chapter 13 because God's timing is always perfect. I want you to see something else in John chapter 2 on the wedding. In John chapter 2, verse 1, there's these 4 words that start the entire story about this wedding with this incredible blooper. It says, on the 3rd day. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana. Now, Cana was a village that was about two days' walk from Galilee. John chapter 1, Jesus, his disciples, and Mary are in Galilee. John chapter 2, they've walked 2 days. They're now in Cana. It's the 3rd day. But what we know is that the 3rd day holds great significance for Christians, doesn't it? You see, I want to take you back to that day when Jesus was crucified. It was a Friday. He was hung on a cross. He died in the middle of the afternoon. He was taken down from the cross. He was placed in a tomb, a borrowed tomb at that evening. I want you to imagine that you had followed Jesus his 3 years, or part of those 3 years while he was here on this earth doing his ministry. Maybe you were his disciple and had followed him the entire 3 years. Maybe you had picked up somewhere along the way, but you believed in Jesus. You claimed that he was who he said he was, and you believed that he was coming to save you and to save the entire world from the Roman oppression and from all of these, the life crisis that you were involved in, where the odds were insurmountable. You just didn't think you could get out of it anyway. You didn't know what was going to happen. But you surely didn't think the person who was going to lead that revolution would be hung on a cross and die. Did you get any sleep that Friday night? My guess is no. You're anxious, you're worried, you have no idea what's coming next, you have no idea what happened, you're questioning why you're going through all this and why everybody's going through all this. You didn't sleep that Friday night. And here's what I'm willing to guess this morning, is that you've had several of those sleepless Friday nights in your lifetime. Something's come up in your life. Maybe it's that you have finally gotten to the place in your marriage where you just think there's no hope left. Maybe you lie awake at night thinking your parenting skills just aren't up to par. Maybe you don't know how you're going to deal with a friendship issue, a relationship issue. Maybe you don't know how you're going to pay that bill that's coming due. Maybe you don't know what you're going to do about the job that you just lost, or how to bring home a paycheck, or maybe you don't know why the doctor's not telling you what you want to hear. Maybe your church, or fill in the blank, has disappointed you. You know what it's like to have those sleepless Friday nights. And then Saturday doesn't bring much hope. Imagine you were there following Jesus. He's been laid in the tomb. You wake up Saturday, the world is dark, it's gloomy, it's dreary, it's hopeless. Where now? What do we do? What in the world? You've had those Saturdays. You ever think to yourself, why did Jesus do it that way? Why did God do it that way? Why did he orchestrate it that way? Why was it Friday, then Saturday, then the third day? Here's what I know. I know that when you're in those places of those sleepless Friday nights and those long, dark, hopeless Saturdays, Sunday's coming. The third day's coming. The best is yet to come, because God's timing is always perfect. The odds of that are 100% guaranteed. God's timing is always perfect. It may not look like it's perfect. You may not think it should happen that way, but God's timing is always perfect. 100% of the time. And if you're in that place right now where you're not sleeping, where the days are hopeless, listen, Sunday's coming. The third day's coming. The best is yet to come. And here's how it's going to work. I love this part of the wedding story. It says that Jesus, verse 6, took 6 stone water jars that were there for Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 to 30 gallons, and he told the servants, fill the jars with water. Now, these jars were these huge jars. The Bible tells us there were 6 of them. They held up to 20 to 30 gallons apiece. And everybody at the wedding knew exactly what these jars were for. When you came into the celebration, oftentimes they were placed outside the village. When you walked into a village, someone's home, when you walked into someone's home, your hands would be dirty. You took the water, or you were given some water. It was poured over your hands, and you would wash your hands. They were used ceremonially to purify your hands, to wash your hands. Every guest at the wedding, every servant standing there knew exactly what these water pots were for. And Jesus said, look, take them, fill them to the brim, 20 to 30 gallons, get them completely full. Do exactly what I tell you to do. The beauty of this is this. Jesus takes whatever we're willing to give him to do miracles. He takes whatever's at hand. He takes whatever we've got. So Jesus could have turned water into wine, or back up. Jesus could have made wine thousands of different ways, millions of different ways. He could have done it all of these different ways. This is Jesus. He could have done anything he wanted. He chose ordinary water pots with ordinary water. This wasn't holy water. It wasn't magic water. It was water. We don't know how he turned the water into wine. We don't know. But we know this. He took something very common and very ordinary that was already there, and he worked with it. Jesus takes what's already there, and he works with it. Here's the point. If you have just a little faith in that situation where you're in, that situation where you're not sleeping, where everything seems hopeless, you have just a little faith, Jesus will take it and he'll work with it. In fact, I believe it was Jesus that said, all you need is faith the size of a mustard seed, smallest seed known to man. Just a little, you have just a little hope, just a glimmer, just a sliver of hope. Give it to Jesus, he'll take it and do a miracle with it. You have just a little trust in Jesus, just a little trust in Jesus. Give it to him, he'll take it. And if you will give him those things, the best is yet to come. Because Jesus takes what he has to work with. Just give him the little that you have. I know in those sleepless nights and those long, dark, hopeless Saturdays, you have just a little faith, a little hope, a little trust. Give it to him, and the best is yet to come. The odds of that, 100%. Every single time. Verse 11, I told you we would get there. It says that through the miracle, his glory was manifested and his disciples believed in him. Isn't that what we all want, is more of God's glory in our life? Right? And that his disciples, these are the ones he chose to be mentored, to coach, to grow, to disciple, if you will, for 3 years. It says they believed in him. Does that mean they didn't yet believe? I don't know the answer to that. Here's what I know. It means their trust in him grew. And every single time you and I are in a life situation, if we are willing to bring what we have to Jesus, the little we have, to call on his name and to do what he says, every single time, 100%, the odds are our trust in him will grow. I want to share a story with you. Some of you may be familiar with this story. It's been told several times. It's floated around social media. It's a very common story. Maybe you're hearing it for the very first time. There was this lady, she was elderly, in a church congregation. She had just found out that she had a terminal diagnosis, and she didn't have long to live. So she called up her pastor and wanted her pastor to come over and visit with her. She wanted to get everything in order. So she wanted to visit with him about what songs she wanted at her funeral, what scripture she wanted to use, what stories she wanted told. This is not uncommon. I get this a lot. And so the pastor went to her house and sat with her and visited and got all of that information. And at the end, she said to him, and I also want a Bible, the Bible that I've used my entire life. I want it to be put in the casket with me. Just bury it with me, put it in there. So the pastor agrees to that, writes all this down, makes sure he has it, and begins to leave her house after praying with her, knowing that this may be the last time he has a chance to visit with her, to talk with her. Before he can make it out the door, she hollers at him and says, hey, one more thing. I want to be buried with a fork in my right hand. So in my casket, just put a fork in my right hand. And he had already been told by her that she wanted her funeral to be open casket. So he says, oh, absolutely, I'll do whatever you wish, but I'm sorry, I just have to know why a fork in your right hand. She said, Pastor, I've grown up in church my entire life. Do you know how many church meals I've eaten? How many meals at the church I've eaten? Potluck meals, organized meals, social meals, all these meals I've eaten at the church. And there's something I picked up on during my lifetime in all these meals I've eaten at the church. I would sit and I would be eating this delicious meal, this main course. Sometimes there were appetizers with it, but this main course, it would be awesome, fantastic. And I would be finished and I would be there at the table socializing, and someone who was working the event would come along to me and say, do you want me to take your plate? Yes, absolutely, please take my plate. And they would say to me, keep your fork. She said, I learned through the years that meant one thing and one thing only. The best was yet to come. Dessert was coming. And I would need my fork to eat it. And so, Pastor, I want to be buried with a fork in my right hand because I know that the best is yet to come. And I want everyone to know that I know that the best is yet to come. And so the day of her funeral, the casket's open, everyone's filing by, the preacher standing up on the platform, they file by, they see her, how that works, see the Bible, see the fork in her right hand. The pastor couldn't help but laugh as he was watching all their facial expressions as they filed by. And then it was his turn to stand up and share the story of the fork in her right hand. I share that story with you today to tell you this. I know the odds are some of you sit in this room this morning and you don't know that the best is yet to come. But I want you to know that with Jesus, the best is always yet to come. And this morning, we've done something a little strange. If you were walking in and saw these, you probably thought, what are we doing today? We have some baskets placed at the doors of the worship center with plastic forks in them. And we simply want you to do this. If you're here this morning and you're in one of those places where it just seems like life is overwhelming, you've been praying about something for so long, you don't know how you're going to get out of the situation that you're in, you're experiencing those sleepless nights and those long, hopeless Saturdays, we simply want you to pick up a plastic fork and take it with you. Maybe you want to put it on your bed, maybe your dresser, maybe in your bathroom, maybe in your desk at work or your car, so that every time you see this fork, you're reminded of the hope, the faith, and the trust, and that the best is yet to come.